Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Manufacturing Management live panel event. My name is Chris Beck. I'm the editor of Manufacturing Management magazine. Today, we're going to be exploring the ever-present issue of skills, and in particular, how to train apprentices during the lockdown. I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Mitchell, Director of Apprenticeships at KUKA, the manufacturers organisation, as well as two apprentices, Cammie Tarrant of Collins Aerospace and Richard Pinnell of KUKA. Pre-lockdown, both were amongst the 1,400 or so learners undertaking hands-on training at KUKA's Apprentice Technology Training Centre, in Aston in Birmingham. The centre is one of the UK's leading apprentice training facilities, and it uses hands-on techniques to deliver a range of qualifications, either 1 day a week or 4-week blocks, and then provides on-the-job training for apprentices. However, the COVID-19 crisis has meant the technology centre's classes have largely been forced online, meaning tutors and learners like Richard and Cammie have had to adapt relatively quickly to new ways of working. So, Stephen, what has that new way of working look like, and how does it differ to what you offered before?
So, as you've already mentioned, we've got a facility at Birmingham that was specifically built to handle the volume of apprentices that you've been talking about, a significant investment that KUKA put in to achieve that. And all that equipment is there, and classrooms have been built to basically to bring apprentices to a pace of work, where they would get their hands-on training on various machine tools, on various pieces of equipment, whatever robotics, and then the classrooms in a very traditional college classroom sense, the classroom delivery, their college qualifications would then be delivered in the traditional sense with a tutor at the front of the classroom, delivering material. Of course, COVID-19 comes along and that stops. So we've had to rapidly adapt. We were a week or two ahead of the thinking, but the lockdown came very fast when it did come, and we could have been more prepared if we had more time. But actually, very quickly, we went from an in-centre based training process to a home-based training process. So that went in two phases. Phase one was we, within a week, had converted all of our classroom delivery to being delivered online, so that every apprentice within 2 weeks was being being taught their the relevant subjects to get their BTEC qualifications or their HNC qualifications. So we maintained continuity, and then it took us about 3 weeks to rebuild what was traditional training materials for hands-on delivery into an online type solution. And that meant a restructure and a reshape of some of that material so that we could sort of still get across the theories of using various types of equipment, machine tools, etc., without actually physically having that machine tool present. And there are challenges to that, and they're still to be overcome. But the speed of the transition has allowed us to continue training all of our apprentices, and we learn every day.
Of course, yeah. And Richard, how has it, and Cammie, I suppose, how has it changed the way that you two are learning and studying? Start with Richard.
I mean, for me, it's been obviously really weird from going into the training centre every day, and then to doing 2 days online a week, and becoming more independent than you would be if you're at the centre.
Yeah.
It just means you have to do probably a little bit more yourself, and there's less of an interaction. And obviously doing it so quick from 1 week to the next, being completely out of centre and online, is a bit of a learning curve, to be honest.
Sure. Cammie, how about you?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. So yeah, it's a bit harder. You do have to do a lot more yourself. But I've got good teachers, and they do actually respond to emails, where most people aren't getting responses. So I've been lucky, really.
Good.
So
good.
yeah.
And do you find that having to do more yourself has made you more independent, and that can only be a good thing going forward?
Yeah, I do personally. I feel like I've done a lot more myself. I feel like I've learnt more being at home, to be
Oh,
honest.
good, good.
Because I do kind of switch off in the classroom. I'm like, get distracted quite easy. So I
Do I
feel
want to
like
hear?
I've actually learnt a lot more. So.
Oh, good. Stephen, how have you seen the apprentices respond, whether that's Richard and Cammie or you know, many of the others that you've got?
So I think it's interesting. I think the responses that you've just heard are actually some of the things that we've learned out of this. So it's interesting when we talk about apprentices. So a lot of apprentices, and I'm not speaking for Richard and Cameron because they'll have their own view. But we do know that when a lot of apprentices come into an apprenticeship, they want to be hands-on involved. They want to work. They want to physically learn new skills. I'm not saying that they aren't academic or they don't want to learn in a classroom, but that's not what their primary driver was for many. Sure. Yeah. And so actually the classroom delivery, which has just been mentioned, can be quite challenging for us at times. That's not necessarily what everyone expected. And I think one of the things that's come out of this transition is actually we've managed to break down some of those very issues that you've just Cammie's just mentioned. You sit in a classroom, there's 12 of you in there, there's a tutor at the end. It's quite traditional in approach. Mm-hmm. It's quite easy to switch off, you know. You get the materials, you can pick it up later if you need to. It's difficult to stay with it, and it takes really, really excellent teachers, you know, the best of the best to keep everybody engaged all the time. Whereas when you go online and you're at home, the environment's different. I think individuals have more control of the environment they're actually in, and there's less distraction from people around them as well. So our feedback is our engagement levels are actually higher online than they are when we're in classroom. And we monitor these all the time, and they're always challenging to improve them. So that's a big eye opener for us, to be fair. We actually expected to have the reverse problem.
Sure.
And that's really one of the interesting takeaways here.
Richard, obviously you're technically employed by KUKA. You're just using the Make UK Centre here and there. How have they responded to the kind of digital training that Make UK are offering? Are they offering any of their own? And have they given any feedback on the kind of quality of learning that you're now receiving?
In terms of KUKA haven't provided me with any training. They're kind of relying on Make as a training provider to give me that. But they have been in contact quite a lot, asking me how it's going, asking if there's any problems, asking if they can do anything. They've been quite good in terms of that. But obviously I haven't had that many problems. So.
Sure. And Cammie, how have Collins Aerospace given any feedback on the kind of learning you're doing now?
Yeah, they've been quite good, but like even when I was at the college, I did still have a lot of support. Like we have always have meetings every 6 weeks. Sure. We have I have Martin come from Make UK every 10 weeks, so I've always had help. But if I needed it, I know where to go, sort of thing. So good. They're not constantly checking up on me, but I know where to go if I need to. So.
Do you think this is a question for everyone, I suppose? Do you think that online learning, Stephen, as you mentioned, obviously you can't necessarily do the hands-on side of it that people need and indeed want, but do you think that the kind of classroom element is now going to be predominantly online and we'll see less classroom-based traditional learning?
So if I give you an overall perspective based on the feedback we've had so far, and then maybe Cammie and Richard can either endorse or give an alternative view, because it's an individual thing, and that is one of the things that's very clear. You know, learning is an individual thing, so we get generic feedback that says people generally like to learn online, particularly of the generations that we're generally working with here. But there are also individuals in there that hate it. They just don't get it, and they find it a struggle, which I guess is just the same as you'd find in the classroom. And the job for us is to pick up those people and help them differently. So there are definitely, it's not the only way, and it's not a better way, it's just a different way.
Sure.
I also suspect that over time, as we as teachers or as teaching staff hone their skills, because there is a different style and approach necessary to teach online compared to a classroom. You know, you don't have that same personal interaction. You don't have that touch, that feel for what's going on in the environment, because you can't feel it the same way. So teachers are also adapting, and that may change the interaction levels, the engagement levels differently later over time. And that should be part of our job anyway, is to make it so that as many people can cope with that method of teaching as possible. So there's definitely that aspect to it. The other aspect to it is the feedback we get is that there are some subjects that are tough to teach online. Again, it's a place of where we are, and over time maybe we'll improve. So the feedback we give is that subjects that you could say are more generic theory and knowledge based in terms of maybe the materials of the properties of materials, for example,
Sure.
which is, you know, about learning sets of rules. That's fairly relatively easy to teach online and explain. But if you get into a conceptual subject like calculus in maths, or integration or whatever, then, and some of those theories can be quite difficult to get across. And you do need a lot more one-to-one interaction. And the feedback we get from our learners is that they actually would prefer to do them in a classroom. So I think one of the things that will come out of this, there will be a place for both. And it's a question of getting the balance right. There are a lot of benefits both ways, and like all these things, there's different teaching methods. You use the best what you've got to get the best outcome, and that's where we must always go back to our focus. It's not just grab technology for technology's sake, but from a point of view, what is the end point? And the end point is to have highly skilled, highly capable, highly knowledgeable, trained apprentices.
Of course, yeah.
And that's what we see as the takeaway so far, and I'd be interested to see if how the other two agree with that or disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard and Cammie, have you got anything to add?
I'd probably agree with most of that. I've seen that those don't struggle too much in BTEC lessons, like myself. Online learning hasn't been that difficult, but for the ones that do struggle and like to show a teacher they're working or something, or ask more detailed question, have struggled in terms of communicating online. But yeah, I'd probably agree. I'd agree.
Cammie, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, I agree as well. Because there's half the class that just get it and half that just like really struggle. But then there's also a part of the class that are actually just lazy. It's like they do know how to do it. They are just lazy. So, but I think it's about the same. Like, if I was doing maths, I think I'd struggle a lot more than I am now.
Sure. Stephen, kind of on a wider aspect, there'll be lots of manufacturers, who've much like every other sector at the moment, who are going through some funny times. They don't necessarily know what's going to happen tomorrow, even, let alone 2 or 3 months down the line. They might have had to furlough staff. They might have had to stop production temporarily, and for them, maybe their apprenticeship program and kind of getting the next generation through might have fallen down the order of importance. But what would you say to those people? Do you think it's quite short-termism to look like that, to think like that?
So it's an easy thing for me to say because I'm on the side which sure. I'm here to promote apprenticeships, and I have to recognise that. We know that this crisis has caused a lot of different people, a lot of different issues, but I have to sit here and take a longer term view of that, and I think that's really important that we don't lose sight of that longer term view. I've heard different reasons why people will or won't engage in apprenticeship programs going forward, but fundamentally, in the long term, we don't have a choice. The fact that we're all locked in our various rooms of our houses at the moment doesn't in itself mean that we can't start new training programs. Whereas that's often, I think it's already perceived that you can't start a new training program because how are you going to do it? Well, actually, we're doing it all the time. And yes, there'll be some clunky bits of it still as time goes on, but actually we won't be locked in our rooms. In fact, we're now coming out of this lockdown process gradually as a country now, and if everything goes well, it'll be smooth.
Yeah.
The other part of it is that even if we've got a changing environment in our factories, in our workplaces, in our training centres, we still will be able to train our apprentices. We'll still be able to train staff, and we still don't have a choice because that's our new environment. And actually, some of the stuff that we're learning through what you can do away from the environment in terms of online learning can be applied just as equally in the environment, in the work environment, to actually help that situation as well. It doesn't all have to be go back the way it was. And so all these barriers that are currently temporary maybe, but that they really mustn't stay. We really must focus because we will need to continue our skills, close to the skills gap. Not just on apprenticeships, but in general terms.
Of course, yeah.
That's not going away. So we just don't stop. We mustn't stop.
No. Cammie and Richard, we'll come to Cammie first. Do you think, do you still feel like Collins Aerospace recognise the importance of apprentices like you and are kind of looking forward and hopefully training you up going forward?
Yeah, I think they do. Like, I've messaged them because I've been like a bit worried about my job. I've been furloughed as well.
Sure.
So I've messaged them, like, asking those questions. So there's nothing to worry about. Like, if anything, they put more time into apprentices than they're doing to their own staff. So like, they've spent so much money and time into our training and stuff. Like, I'm in my 3rd year, and I'm about to take over someone's place who's retiring. So to me,
Sure.
I'm like a big deal at the moment. You know what I mean? Like, if I don't go back, they've got no one there. So yeah, I think that Collins are doing really well. Yeah, they are looking out for everyone.
Good. And Richard at KUKA.
Yeah, KUKA are exactly the same. They prioritise apprentices anyway. And the amount of time and effort that my managers and supervisors and mentors and stuff have put in, it hasn't dropped, and they've kept the messages up saying that it's not going to drop.
No, sure. Stephen, do you think this is a chance, you kind of alluded to it just then, do you think this is a chance to really shake up training? People can look at the kind of apprenticeships or indeed kind of on the job retraining and reskilling, look at what they've done in the past and maybe look at more flexible ways of doing it, offer people the chance to do it at home if they're not doing it already, and things like that. Do you think this is a good catalyst for that kind of change?
Yeah, this is definitely from my perspective. This is definitely a complete paradigm shift for everybody. I think it's interesting. It's both sides of this equation. It's the employers and the employees, but it's also the training provisions. So if you take the training provision side, it's very traditional. There's been talk, and you get to the very high-end universities, and there are all sorts of alternative methods of teaching going on. A lot of them experimental. The quality of the platforms that we operate on, such as the one we're on today, have been gradually progressing. But this should be accelerating that, so that the tools that are available in an online platform can allow a different style, but in an even more interactive environment than even we have today. And different media, we've got lots of media options these days. We just haven't moved them forward in the training world fast enough. So things like, we talk about virtual reality as a subject. Virtual reality is a great training tool. We've done lots of experiments with it with Cambridge University, the Institute for Manufacturing there. The issue is not actually the training. The issue is developing the environments. And that's always been the barrier because of the cost and the time. Now this should speed that up, because actually, virtual reality is one step closer to a hands-on environment, and it makes it easier to remove an employee from their workplace to allow them to train away from their workplace, either as part of their own time or as part of a controlled process where they can train in a safer environment, which might be necessary. And the other side of that, of course, and we've started to mention, is that the employers then have more scope about how they do training, because there's this automatic assumption that to train somebody, you have to take them away from their workplace, and that there's no other way of doing it. It has to be done between work's time. Well, maybe individuals and the employers have to be more flexible about that as well. And in fact, an online solution is one way of doing that as well. It also means the facilities that have to be put in place don't have to exactly be local anymore, because so training provision can be coming from anywhere if it's done remotely. So it opens up a whole plethora of new ways of approaching the training subject. And they've always been around, but not that now is the opportunity to accelerate that, the implementation and the development of those. That's definite for me. That has to be a big takeaway. Certainly it's something we will be doing from a provider, just so that we can provide our employers more options.
Sure. Yeah. Richard and Cammie, do you see, what was the main reason, I suppose, that you decided to kind of go down this route and get into manufacturing via an apprenticeship? Richard, what was the kind of the key driver for you?
So for me, I went to sixth form. So I completed my 2 years of sixth form. And I kind of just got sick of learning in a classroom. I've done it obviously since primary school. You've done it the whole time, and I just didn't want another 3, 4, 5 years of that, and then potentially not have a job at the end of it. And so I started looking for alternative routes in year 12, just as a better option, really, for me.
And Cammie, were you similar?
Yeah, I enjoyed product design at school, so I liked hands-on. Like, I didn't like sitting in the classroom, like listening all the time. So I did start sixth form, and then I left the day after. I went to college, so I did an aerospace course before I got the apprenticeship. So I enjoyed it before I actually got it. So just went down the route that I was already on, sort of thing.
And Stephen, do you think stories like that aren't uncommon? There's lots of people, as we've kind of alluded to in the conversation so far, who the classroom isn't for them, or they want a fresh start. Do you think we've heard a lot in the last few weeks about all the good work that manufacturers been doing, whether that's making parts for ventilators, PPE, hand sanitizer, anything really, and one positive to come out of the pretty awful time we've had in the last couple of months is the way that industry has stepped up. Do you think now could be a chance for a kind of to entice a new generation of people into manufacturing, whether that's through an apprenticeship route or a second career or whatever? And if there are people out there like Richard and Cammie who maybe are finishing school or are unsure about what to do next, could manufacturing and starting an apprenticeship be a good route for them?
I guess the answer to that is it's even more so than it ever was.
Yeah.
So since certainly the modern apprenticeship, if we just talk about the very recent era, has come in over the last 4 or 5 years, the recognised skill shortage in manufacturing generally, the whole process has come together, and the opportunity is there as an alternative and viable route for a young person, or indeed anybody, because an apprenticeship don't know any age, but for a person to actually come in and start a career, change a career, whichever way, and support what effectively is a manufacturing industry. And it's really important for this country. That opportunity has always been there. I think what's happened in recent months is that's the opportunity's magnified itself. As you say, you've pointed out some incredible stories about how manufacturing's come to the table. I think we've got to be smart and use those stories to actually continue to promote apprenticeships. All the stats are there. We know that there's a shortage of skilled labour. We know that the roles in general terms in a normal, stable environment are very stable in terms of employment. We know that anybody that goes into an apprentice will probably stay either with the company or in a similar industry to the one they go into for quite significant periods of time. We know that there's no cost burden attached to it as an individual, which there is when you go into university because of the way the structures work. There are a lot of positives for going down the apprentice route. And at the end of the day, there's one thing that pops out of this that I think both Richard and Cammie have alluded to, and that's partly to do about I guess you could call it, modern day thinking about reward and recognition. The thing about apprenticeships and going into a manufacturing environment is that you do see the output of your efforts quite quickly in stages as you progress, as opposed to perhaps in an A-level environment where it takes you a whole 2 years to get one single qualification. There's a place for both, but certainly there is loads of scope for an apprenticeship to meet those needs, and there's an absolute desperate demand, and there will continue to be. As it's inevitable as we regrow the economy from where we are today.
Of course, yeah, and I mean, I don't want to put too negative a spin on it, but we've seen the economic data today. There is a recession coming. It's going to be a big recession as well. Unfortunately, people may be out of a job or struggling to find work, or in a bit of a dead end job that maybe they want to leave and get a fresh start, and an apprenticeship or reskilling into manufacturing is a kind of good way to do that.
Absolutely. We know what's possible here. We've seen it in the last couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard and Cammie, how what are you hoping? That your learning in the way you used to know it has been interrupted now for 2 months and counting. How do you see what impact do you see this having on your development? Do you think it's going to affect it in any way, positively or negatively? And how quickly do you think you'll be able to pick things back up as they were, if and when the time comes?
I'm not sure about for Cammie, but for me, being a first year, and I've done A-levels and stuff, so this year in terms of everything but the hands-on working has been pretty simple. So I didn't really need a lot of assistance from KUKA. So I think because by the time I go into my second year, KUKA will be kind of back to normal, and I will have adapted to this online learning. My learning won't have been interrupted too much.
Sure.
It'll just be a case of catch up on that workshop learning.
Yeah. And Cammie, how about you?
Yeah, same for me really. It's just positive. Although I was already at college before I got the apprenticeship, and it was all classroom based. But being online don't really make much difference to me. So I just sit there and listen and do the work. But to me, it's just the same. So yeah.
Yeah, but I guess you've got more flexibility. The advantage of working from home is that you can work when suits you best. You don't have to be regimented by certain times. Obviously, you've got to do the work, but you can kind of do it at your own pace and everything else. Stephen, do you think we hear a lot about Industry 4.0 and automation and technology? You kind of mentioned virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything else earlier. And I think, do you think this may be an opportunity to kind of really? I know obviously at the training centre in Aston, you've got a lot of very high tech equipment and some of the latest kit. Do you think this is a chance for manufacturers to kind of really press on with Industry 4 now? Do you think being able to monitor your plant remotely and everything else is something that people are now kind of getting to grips with because they've been forced to, essentially?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You have to be careful you get into generation games here, and we're all pretty IT savvy these days. We used to having our smartphones. We used to our clever TVs and our Alexas and everything else. What we're not good at is we're not good at understanding what it can really do. So it's about application. It's one thing talking to your Alexa and getting the time of day or the weather forecast, but it's a different thing realizing actually that in a different way, in a different type of model, you'd be using that same sort of logic and thinking to monitor a machine tool from afar, for instance. What I think this current environment's done is just perhaps made people think differently about this, particularly those that have been, those that have been running businesses, working in businesses for a number of years or for a period of time, and things have been done one way, and that's been quite stable, and it's all worked. This is a shake-up. I think it's incumbent upon us as training providers, and you can hire and talk about governments and everything else, but it's incumbent on us to actually use what's happened in terms of changes in the way technology has applied itself both at home in a casual sense or a social media sense and in a training sense, and take those lessons and translate them into the possible, and what's the art of the possible stroke industry for. That's up to us, our duty. But I think naturally, and I'd like to think that naturally, people that run businesses and are going to figure out, are perfectly capable of figuring out what the next steps are. This maybe will give them a bit more of a slight different slant on what becomes important and what's relevant. And also, I think they're realizing that if you use technology really well, that actually it can proof you from some of these issues. And it gives you a little bit more resilience. And obviously there's all the subjects about productivity and everything else, and we may have to deal with those because we're running out of our population to be able to do the jobs that we need to do. Being positive, we'll get growth and we'll get a demand back. So I think this will just help refocus people's direction. And then it's up to the rest of us to actually sort of put that into a meaningful process and plan for how do we train people and how do we make sure they have the skills to do that.
And what role will Make UK be playing in that, especially I suppose from your perspective at the training centre, the technology hub?
So it's interesting. So we have a lot of facilities, as you mentioned, that we have equipment that takes a person from having no engineering skills all the way through to being able to theoretically understand how to set up a whole robotics cell, or how to actually make an automated plant run, and how do you manage it, and how does it interact. And so we have all that capability right through our business. It's interesting that our apprentices only go so far through that, because that's the way a modern apprenticeship works. I think for me, one of the takeaways here is that we all need to find ways of weaving more of that digital industry 4 piece into our apprenticeships. Whether it's required or not, it's how do we do that so that it works for everybody. But I also think that for us, we have all that capability. And there is another piece to this jigsaw puzzle, which is not just about apprentices, it's about general upskilling of the population. And there's a workforce out there who are going to be operating in a new environment. And it's up to us to find ways to actually make that equipment, that capability accessible in perhaps ways we haven't done before. Because it's not, everybody's going to need to be able to work out and have to have a better understanding of what the digital future looks like in order to actually for us to move forward. So, that's going to be a very strong focus for us. And of course, as Make UK as a wider membership organisation, we constantly promote various activities around promotion of digital skills and cyber, and to really just reinforce and to drive policy and to drive industry thinking. So I think what that will do is it will just re-emphasize that even more, and it is already emphasized.
Sure. We're very, very quickly running out of time. The joys of the software we're using means we only get 40 minutes, but I think this has been a really valuable chat. I think it's very important for manufacturers, especially as the industry starts to restart again. That manufacturers remember that people like Richard and Cammie are the future, and if we don't invest in that now, regardless of what's going on, then we're going to end up with an even bigger problem 5 or 10 years down the line. So thank you all for your time. I'll be sharing this obviously on LinkedIn, and please, if you're watching this, keep an eye out for other sessions that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. Please feel free to comment either on the LinkedIn post or on the website, or you can email me directly, chris.beck@markallengroup.com. And if you've got any specific questions for Stephen or Richard or Cammie, then please let me know, and we'll make sure they are answered. But thank you all for watching. Thank you again to Stephen, Richard and Cammie for taking part, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.